I used to be the guy that held friendships and loved ones and my relationships with others to the highest regard. I would always try to be the guy that would go out of my way for others and make sure people around me knew that I cared. And I'm not saying that I still don't feel that way to a certain degree, it's just that a part of letting go of your old self also means sacrificing that to a certain degree. It means putting yourself first and prioritizing yourself and saying no a lot more to others. And you also realize along the way that letting go of people is just a part of life, right? Because as you grow, you naturally distance yourself between the people that you once knew. Because your patterns change, your values change, your beliefs change. Maybe you stop caring about the opinions of others, maybe you have more boundaries. Maybe you just grow in a way where other people just can't relate to anymore, right? Whatever it is, that growth when you let go of your old self, it will change the dynamics of those relationships and oftentimes will cost you the people that you once knew that were more attached to your old self. You see, every single relationship is built on this kind of unspoken bond or unspoken contract between you and the other person. It's kind of like you know this person as X, which is why you have this type of relationship with that person. So when you grow, right, when you let go of that version of yourself, the old version of yourself, sometimes people won't necessarily adjust to who you become. Maybe you stop playing a role which they benefited from. Maybe they knew you as the guy that was really fun at parties. And when you stop being that party guy that they once knew, right, when your priorities shift, that's when things begin to change because that's who they knew you as. Or maybe they knew you as the guy that was the gamer, right? You were the guy that hopped on Discord on Friday and Saturday nights and they ran ranked with. Maybe you grew out of that. Maybe you stopped playing games. Maybe you stopped going on Discord. Maybe you're looking for love. Maybe you got a girlfriend. Maybe you were the guy who used to smoke with your homies a lot, but now you're working a lot more. Maybe you don't have time for that anymore. You had to start saying no to those smoke sessions or kickbacks. Whatever it is, right, when the people around you don't adjust to that growth, that unspoken contract that the relationship was built off of is all of a sudden broken. When you start to grow out of that old version of yourself, this is where you start to see people leave your life. And for me, right, that old version of myself was the nice guy. And you guys know this, I've told like a bunch of sim stories by now. But back then I was the guy that couldn't say no to anything because I didn't want to let anyone down. I was the guy that would be self-deprecating to make people feel better, to be more comfortable to be around. I was the guy that would play the fool to make other people laugh. I was the guy that would talk to his girl best friend about the guy that she actually liked. Like I was that guy. And at some point I realized that being that guy gets you absolutely nowhere in life, which is why I have so much disdain for that old version of myself. What you gotta realize is that to truly grow in life, you have to put yourself first. And when you put yourself first, you naturally have to start saying no. You're going to have to let some people down and you have to be okay with that. And unfortunately, some people will look at you like you switched up, especially if that's not how they knew you before. I remember a conversation that I had with one of my homegirls who was my girl best friend at the time. And this was the first time that I saw her since I broke up with my girlfriend. And she was telling me about how every time I would be with a girl, I would naturally distance myself from her. And she was basically talking about how I was different now, basically how I switched up, but in like a nice way. That I'm less approachable, that I'm kind of like a ghost now, that I have more of an edge to me, X, Y, and Z. And it was crazy because my ex had something very similar before we broke up. And it really had me thinking like, did I switch up? Like, did I change in all those negative aspects? Did I cut everyone off? And I thought about it, right? But in reality, the only difference was I started saying no a lot more. It wasn't that I was trying to cut people off. I just didn't have time for certain things. Like, it wasn't a thing where I was consciously trying to distance myself from certain people. And apparently, some people took it that way. Like, to me, I just became way more focused on myself. And I guess some people did see it as like a drastic change. And eventually some of those relationships did fade. But the people that I did stay in contact with, it was never a conscious decision. It was just natural. Like, those are the relationships that never feel forced. And that's when I realized sometimes life is going to take you in a certain direction and not everyone is going to come with you. And the same goes the other way around. Sometimes you just have to let some people go. Trying to hold on to everyone while also letting go of your old self is like trying to rebuild a house while not moving anything inside. Eventually there's going to be certain things that you have to move around and maybe even get rid of if you want to create a new home. Like, people are going to come and go, and it's something that I had to understand about life. Because again, back then I was the guy that was like, man, I love my friends, we're going to stay together forever. The way I see it now is that we're all passengers on a train, and that train that you're on is your life. And there's going to be a lot of passengers that get on and off your train at different stops and different periods and different points in your life. Some passengers might get on at the beginning and some passengers might get on a lot later. Some passengers might be on your train for a long time and some might just be on for a few stops. But eventually everyone has to catch the train to their own lives. It's just that you might be going in the same direction at that point in time. And your train doesn't stop just because some passengers got off. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that you won't see them ever again, right? Maybe your trains are going in a similar direction on the same path. But ultimately, everyone's got to catch the train to their own lives, and sometimes those trains are going to diverge paths, and you have to be okay with that. And oftentimes this begins to happen when you let go of your old self. Your train is going in a direction that's far too different from where they're going. Maybe you guys stopped speaking the same language, right? Maybe you were obsessed with self-fulfillment and growth and, chasing your purpose, and they were still obsessed with whatever you guys related on before. Maybe some people never really fuck with you for who you are, but just how you made them feel. So the second you stop making them feel that way, that relationship had no foundation. Like, there could be a million different reasons or factors as to why that is, right? It's kind of funny. I had a childhood best friend where up until like middle school, we were basically attached at the hip. And everyone thinks that we had some massive fallout, even mutual friends or even my parents. Like, they used to ask me all the time, like, how come you guys don't talk? How come you guys don't hang out, etc. When in reality, there was no dramatic fallout. We just became very different people. Difference in values, philosophies, like those shared interests were no longer there. We just didn't speak the same language anymore, and that's completely fine, right? That's life. Like, when you outgrow people, it doesn't necessarily have to be this sad thing. Sometimes people are just meant to be in your life at certain phases or different points. Where they played a specific role in your life at that time and you played one in theirs. Like, it doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? You don't have to take it personal. The one thing that I learned throughout life is that everybody acts based on their self-interest, no matter what. Even the most selfless actions are still predicated on self-interest. So it's like, when you understand this, right, it makes you look at things a lot more objectively. Like, not taking things personally will remove a lot of unnecessary friction in your life. And that's actually the one thing I appreciate about being a guy and having male friendships, is that we don't get into dramatic arguments or need to cry or hug it out or anything like that. Like, as guys, if we have a problem, we can get it sorted real quick. Like, I've always thought it was funny seeing some of my homegirls grow up, like when they're getting into drama, getting into these fallouts or disputes over friendship and gossiping, and the entire friend circle is divided, and then they'd have to get all emotional and cry to each other and reconcile and express their feelings and need their feelings to be heard and validated and all that stuff. Like, that stuff always made me cringe. Just like, if we got a problem, let's just talk about it man to man and dap up afterwards. And if it's not it, then it is what it is, right? It's all good. Everything's smooth. And by the way, I'm not saying that you can't be friends just because you grow and your values and your philosophies or life differs. It's just that those relationships are going to be a lot more forced, because whatever you shared interest in or values or beliefs during your old self, it's no longer there. It's just way easier to be around people who share similar languages or ways of thinking, humor, valued, shared interests, etc. And when you outgrow yourself, those things inevitably will change. And when those things change, so will the people around you at that time. Like, just because you've known someone for a very long time, that doesn't necessarily mean that you guys are meant to be in each other's lives forever. Again, some people are just meant to be in your life for that certain period of time, whether it be friends, peers, girlfriends, partners, etc. It's all just part of life and growing up and becoming a new version of yourself. Oftentimes, a lot of those older connections are purely based off nostalgia. Maybe it was a shared pain or experience, or maybe trauma bonding, you guys were each other's coping mechanism. Like, there was relationships where I had to let go of because the conversations would always circle back to events on the past. Like, the remember whens, right? And don't get me wrong, sharing old memories isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's only when it's like the only thing, especially when you're so removed from that old version of yourself. You then subconsciously want to get away from anything that kind of drags you back to that version of yourself. Just try to remember that there is no growth without sacrifice, and these are things that you have to let go of, and oftentimes are going to come in the form of the people in your life at that time. And even though it might feel sad, right, it's just a part of life, and it's also a sign that you're stepping into the newer version of yourself. You're stepping into an elevated version of your life. And sometimes it is God making room for what's aligned for you in your future. Anyways, hopefully you guys got something from that. Thank you for listening. I love you. I appreciate you. That said, make sure you guys stay true. Talk to you guys real soon.